Good evening and welcome to the 2024-2025 budget hearing of the Gage-Chili Central School District. I am Dr. Mitchell Ball, the Assistant Superintendent for Business. We will get right to it. So in terms of the agenda tonight, we're going to talk about our budget goals and priorities, state of the state, expenditures, revenues, propositions, next step summary, and then public Q&A. So in terms of budget goals and priorities, we're really trying to accomplish three things. One is maintain our current programming and staffing and continue with current district goals. We know that our district goals that we've had for the last couple of years are good district goals, and we want to continue to make sure that we staff appropriately in order to achieve those goals, acknowledging that some things like our federal funding for mental health supports and for AIS, Academic Intervention Services. Some of those funds are going away as a result of the end of the pandemic relief funds. We still want to make sure that we're able to do the important work that we've done in the past, and so looking for ways that we can incorporate some of those expenses into our general operating fund. In addition to that, we're looking to continue multiple opportunities for student engagement. We know that when students have opportunities for extracurriculars, athletic opportunities, that they're more likely to be engaged in our academic programming, so it's very important to us that we continue to provide lots of opportunities that continue to engage our students at a high level. So in terms of expenditures, we have a modified zero-based budget, and what does that mean? That means that our staff members do an incredible job here, both our teaching staff, our support staff, our administrators. Everybody works collaboratively to do a great job of building a budget from zero. And so what that means is we look at what do we need for next year, and we build a budget specifically around that. We don't roll over the budget and add a percentage. We actually build the budget from the bottom up. And so we do know that we only have what's needed within the budget and nothing else. And so this no-frills budget, we're looking at a 3.7% increase in the budget. In 2022, the Consumer Price Index, which is an index that looks at the cost of consumer goods, material supplies, salaries, that increased by over 8%. In 2022, which is last year, 2023, which was last year, it increased 4.12%, and we do know that this year it's looking to increase at a significant rate as well. If you go to the grocery store right now, you know that you're spending more money on groceries than you have in years, and those prices continue to go up and up and up. We also know that wages are going up, and so minimum wage has gone up, and as a result of that, salaries in general are going up, and so we have to accommodate for those when thinking about how we pay our employees so we can maintain our competitiveness in the market and fill all the important jobs that we have. So we do feel that 3.7 is very reasonable given all the market considerations surrounding how money's being spent. So some of our highlighted increases, ERS salaries, those are our support staff salaries. We're currently negotiating 3 contracts. With that in mind, we are budgeting, assuming increases in salaries for those support staff members. TRS salaries, those are our certificated staff members. These could be teachers or administrators, those who hold New York State teaching certification. That increased 5.85. That doesn't mean that those staff members are getting a 5.85% increase. That budget is actually increasing because, as I mentioned earlier, we have those pandemic relief funds that are expiring on September 30th of this year. And so we know that going into next school year, we need to budget for those in the general fund, our general operating fund. That's what we're presenting on tonight. We need to budget for those if we want to retain the great programs and services we're providing currently. And we do know that we still need those because our needs are increasing. Health insurance increase, it's a 5% increase. This is much lower than what you would see out on the market in terms of increases in health insurance costs. This is luckily being balanced by the fact that many of our current contracts We've been able to negotiate in high deductible health plans for new employees. And so not only are the employees saving money on health insurance costs, but the district is as well. And so that's helping keep that percentage at a low level. Operations and maintenance, an increase of 8.49%. This is tied specifically to costs and materials increases. Utilities are definitely on the rise. You can certainly see that in your home bills for energy use. We're also experiencing that through RG&E here in the district. Security of plant, we hired a director of safety and security, and that person starts on May 13th of this fiscal year. And so we know that we're going to need to budget for that. That doesn't mean that that increase of $160,000 is tied specifically to that individual. That individual's salary is a portion of it. There's also rolled into that number some increased security features that we'll have here in the district, like an app that allows us to initiate things like lockdowns and lockouts. And so there are a number of additional security features, and then the rest of the security personnel salary are rolled into that budget line. Pupil services, although it's only a 2.46% increase, it's a $551,000 increase. So it does, although it's a small percentage increase, it's a higher dollar value increase. And then transportation services, those costs are tied specifically to fuel and energy. Overall, a $4.8 million increase in these categories alone, which is a significant increase when looking at the overall budget increase. So one of the things we have to do under New York State Ed law is break our budget into three parts: administrative, instructional, often called program component, and capital component. And so just looking from year to year, from 2023-24 to 24-25, seeing a consistent breakdown in how the district intends to spend money going into next year. This is a greater breakdown of those details. This is the instructional programs budget. Again, looking at a $4 million increase. That's the majority of our increases tied to instructional programming, as it should be. Administrative, a slight decrease in the administrative component tied partially to some central services recoding, one budget to the instructional component as it should be properly coded, and then some other selective changes as well. And then the capital component, and this is the largest portion of this budget, is tied specifically to our debt service costs, which are our principal and interest payments on capital work. So it's kind of like your mortgage. We pay these different debt service obligations anywhere from 20 to 25 years, depending on what type of work it is. And so we also borrow much as people would when buying a home. We borrow in order to do capital work. And so that's the largest portion of this, as well as items specific to operating our facilities. So it could be our facilities and maintenance crew, our cleaning crew, our custodians, and also things associated with that type of work. Overall, the expenditure breakdown, the majority of our budget is spent on salary and benefits. We're a people business, and so this is how we spend our money, on people. Debt service is that second component. Those are those principal and interest payments. BOCES services, we get about 71 cents back on every dollar we spend when we purchase things through BOCES. So for example, next year, we're looking to align our elementary ELA, English Language Arts curriculum. And one of the things that we're looking to do is purchase that new curriculum through BOCES so that we can get aid back on it in the next year. So a lot of the things that we do, we purposefully try and funnel those through BOCES because we know that we're able to get aid back. So BOCES is not just for vocational programs and other programs for students. It's also for purchasing various things. Then we get into the smaller items. I will point out that although utilities and fuel costs are on the rise, they're still not a significant portion of our budget, but they can cause fluctuations in terms of how we spend our money. Okay, so that's it for expenditures. Now I'm going to talk about revenues. So in terms of local property taxes, the proposal does not exceed the 2% tax levy limit calculation. Local sales tax is fairly stable. We'll go over that in a little more detail. State funding is lower than it's been in the past, and we'll talk about that. Other revenues are consistent, and due to that low state funding, sorry for the, somebody is moving to get the lights back on. Thank you. In spite of that low state funding, or as a result of that low state funding, we're going to have a greater reliance on reserves and fund balance in this proposal, and so we'll talk about that as well. So local property taxes make up over 47% of all revenue. It's our largest revenue source. Some of the main components include that CPI number, 4.12. Our tax-based growth factor, that's a factor of how much the assessments within the district have grown and the things that have been added as new assessments on that tax base of 0.68. So that gets rolled into what that tax levy limit number is. It's actually not 2% flat, it's 2% plus some other things, the tax-based growth factor being one of those. The pilots, those are payments in lieu of taxes. Pilots are agreements that the county has made with businesses in order to attract them to our communities so that they create jobs here in Monroe County. And so those are negotiated through the Monroe County IDA, which is the Industrial Development Agency, also called COMIDA. And so those are negotiated with the county. And what it is essentially is that these businesses get an abatement on their taxes and their assessments are not on the tax rolls. So they don't get calculated in the same way for how they pay taxes. They have a whole separate system of paying taxes. And so those agreements are typically much less than if those properties were to be on the tax rolls. And so two of those are falling off this year, two of those pilot agreements, one of them being Wegmans over on Chili Ave, and another one, a group called Pontarelli Associates, also out of Chili. Those are both falling off. And so $60 million in assessments for those properties will come back onto the tax rolls, and we'll talk about that in a little more detail in a few minutes, except to say that we're getting a significant decrease in how much money we're getting through those pilot agreements, which means that that decrease gets added back to the levy because we'll be able to collect the money through the levy from those entities and not from residential and commercial, other residential and commercial taxpayers. The ERS is the Employee Retirement System. That's the pension system for support staff. There's a caveat in the tax cap levy legislation that says that if it's greater than 2%, the difference of what that extra, so for us it's 0.1% over that 2% threshold, that's what we're able to collect. For us, that liability is about $14,000, so we're able to collect that in addition to cover that cost. All that being said, I'm looking at a $2.9 million increase in tax collection. That's a 4.96% increase. However, I go back to what I was sharing earlier, is that a significant amount of assessment is coming back onto the tax rolls because those pilots are expiring. And so that means that those entities specifically will pay that difference in taxation based on the valuation of those properties. So what does that mean is that without those coming back onto the tax rolls and without the pilot change, really the increase is about 2.98 in terms of what the taxes will increase by. And so with that being said, it's fairly in line with what it's been for the last few years, and also we feel that it's very responsible given, again, the fact that CPI was 4.12 in 2023, and it's targeted to be high again this year. There's some estimated rates up there acknowledging that those are based on equalization rates that are coming out for this year. Again, Chili is going to 100%, Gates is dropping to 77% because they haven't reassessed in a little while. Potentially we'll look to reassess next year, but that is with the town. But Chili did reassess, so their equalization rate will go up. So that means that the tax rates will be fairly different, and these are estimates up on the screen. I will share that these are just estimates. That's the biggest piece to share. Tax rolls are not finalized. They won't be finalized for many months. And once those are finalized, then we'll be able to do a full calculation and get actual tax rates. So moving on to sales tax. Sales tax account for about 3% of our revenues. As you can see there, a slight increase because we do know that costs are going up. As we mentioned earlier, last 2 years, 8%, 4% CPI. Still looking at more increases this year in terms of the consumer price index. So acknowledging that when you go anywhere, you buy a car, you buy shoes at DSW, whatever you're doing out in the community, there's sales tax associated with that. A portion of that comes back to Monroe County, or comes back to school districts in Monroe County. Point being, we get a portion of that. State funding accounts for about 41% of revenue. Current estimate, $55 million. This is one that is worthy of some discussion. A very small increase going into next year. The district has not seen this small of an increase in decades. One thing that might be worth sharing is that this is closely related to some legislation at the state level whereby districts who had significantly changing demographics still receive the same amount of money that they had in prior years. So for about the last 10 years, there's a number of districts, about 50% in the state, that have been held harmless, as it's been called, or saved harmless. And so what does that mean is that the state generally, for that first category, foundation aid, takes the total amount to be allocated to education, about $30 billion, and overlays it in a formula based specifically on the demographics of the district. So demographics include things like the students with disabilities counts, English language learners, total population, free and reduced lunch percentage. Looks at a whole bunch of things, overlays that amount of money, and then distributes all of that funding based on that formula, those things that are specific to the individual districts, about 700 of them. Well, for about the last 10 years, there's been a lot of districts who have been losing a significant number of students. And so some districts that I've talked to have lost 50% of their students over the last 10 years. Well, the state has made the decision that at a base level, regardless of if you've lost, 100 students out of 200 students, very small district, let's say, you've lost half of your students, then we're still going to maintain the state aid that you had in the prior year, and this has been going on for nearly a decade. And so what does that mean for districts like Gates-Tri-Li, where we've had increased English language learners, increased needs in terms of students with disabilities, increasing free and reduced lunch percentages? That means that we haven't necessarily been getting our equal share of the funding based on the formula. And so for the first time ever, the governor came in and said, we're not going to allow this save harmless to continue. And so in the executive proposal in January, we had a larger increase. And the governor then got a lot of blowback from the state. So about 50% of districts were really upset and said, we're going to lose a whole bunch of money, and this isn't fair to do to us. We had no warning. And so when the governor met with the legislature and they came up with a final budget deal, the decision was made to retain hold harmless going into next year, to not really change the amount of money being allocated to districts. And so that money had to come from somewhere. It came from districts like us to maintain those save harmless districts. And at the end of the day, we ended up seeing a much smaller increase. However, the governor did get the legislature to agree that going into next year, there will be negotiations around how funding will be distributed based on the fact that there are so many safe harmless districts that have had that significant decrease in enrollment but have maintained funding. So all that being said, that's the largest change, is that reduction in foundation aid, which is not good for Gates-Tri-Li. But we do have some balancing mechanisms that we'll talk about in the next couple of slides. BOCES aid, again, we try and funnel as much of our expenses through BOCES, and then we get aid back in the following year. The next two are related specifically to our special education placements. Those can fluctuate depending on the needs of our students, and that aid is distributed based on a prior 3-year snapshot. The next one, two, are tied directly to allocations that we get based on our student counts. Transportation aid is tied specifically to our transportation services. As you know, we've purchased a couple electric school buses, which is driving up our aid, and again, seen some other increases in cost. So we get aid back in the following year at 75% based on our transportation expenses. Building aid, this is tied specifically to our capital work. We get about 81% back on most work, but it's a fairly complex formula that we do, and it helps balance out our debt service cost, as I mentioned earlier. And then high tax aid is something that the district has received for many, many years, and many districts have received this aid throughout the state. Just talking in terms of taxation compared to state aid. All that being said, a $35,000, $36,000-ish increase is not significant for the district, especially when in the past we've had numbers that were in the millions. So other sources of revenue, they're much smaller sources. They account for about $1.43 or $1.9 million. No major fluctuation in that area. And then appropriated fund balance, current estimate about and reserves 5.9 million. These are exhaustible funds and should not be relied on long term. So the good news is that the district has a strong fund balance and reserve use plan in place. It's adopted by the Board of Education. And so we know that state funding is cyclical. It goes up and down. And there's periods where we may be in a good position from aid perspective, and then there's periods where we may be in a really bad position because the state is having a problem balancing their budget, or they're having issues with formulas and how they distribute aid like they're doing this year. Is that the district has done a really good job of planning for potential decreases in aid, revenue issues. And so the good news is that you're going to see that that's a pretty decent increase over prior years. Just share this slide. Going from 3.6 million to 5.9 million going into next year. We are going to dip into some of those reserve funds. And specifically, as you'll note in our reserve fund plan, these are not funds that we want to use long term, but if needed, we're able to tap into them to help balance our budget when things like the state aid dip happen. And so we're going to leverage these funds going into next year in hopes that in the following year or the year after, the state will start to remedy the issues relating to the distribution of funding throughout the state, the equitable funding distribution. So again, our target for utilization of fund balance and reserves is about 4%. We were in a good place getting down to 2.84%. Going into next year, looking at about a 4.43% usage. This is still lower than it was about 3 years ago, 4.3%, but we're really trying to target 4% as a comfortable level of appropriated fund balance and reserve use. So when thinking about the budget, property taxes and state aid are our largest components of revenue, and then sales tax, fund balance and reserves, and then other revenues. Again, here's an overall snapshot of revenue. So now we'll move on to propositions. So there's 3 vote propositions that will go out to the public. The first is the expenditure budget. A reminder that an expenditure budget is not a commitment to do anything specific. Oh, we're losing lights again. So, my apologies for that. The expenditure budget is not a commitment, it is a plan. And so that's one thing to always remember, is that a budget is a plan. And so over the summer, we have reevaluations for our students with disabilities. We have students that come and go. We have changing needs. We may have kids coming to the district that have to be bused from a different area that we didn't anticipate. And so all of those things can happen after budget adoption. So it's always a good reminder that a budget is a plan. And so for the expenditure budget, the public is approving the district to spend no more than what is listed in the proposition. The next piece is bus purchases. About $5 million in bus purchases, acknowledging that a good portion of the funds to pay for those buses will come from NYSERDA in the form of grants and the state in the form of aid. So looking at no more than $726,000 in actual cost, and then we'll see operational savings on top of that while those buses are in operation. So the ESBs, those are electric school buses. I'm looking at purchasing 10 of those. We would be the first in New York State to have a 66-passenger wheelchair bus, electric wheelchair bus, and then 3 additional conventional diesel engine buses, noting that for the purchase of 14 buses, the total cost of $726,000 is fairly reasonable, approximately $50,000 a bus, and then we get operational savings as well. In purchasing those electric buses, they are less costly than a traditional diesel engine bus when we get those grants factored in. And then the third one is the Energy Performance Improvement Project, additional 10% aid. So one of the things that the district is looking at is additional solar energy generation here on the district facilities. We currently have a solar array on top of our middle school, and at the end of Spartan Way, you can see some large mechanical boxes there. That's where we store energy. We're looking to do more of that for a couple of reasons. The first being is that we have approximately $1 million in energy costs a year, specific to electric. And so we would be looking to offset that cost entirely by installing solar energy. Arrays could be ground mounted, could be roof mounted. We have not worked through that yet, but that would be our first priority. Our second priority, obviously, is trying to be as environmentally friendly as we possibly can be when operating. And the third component of that is that there would be a whole lot of opportunities, instructional opportunities in terms of STEM and the academic components of students being able to visit solar sites and talk about how solar energy works. So really, that proposition is not approval to do solar energy. It's approval, the state requires us to get approval in order to get 10% additional in state aid. So the district can do the solar project, energy performance contract, without public approval, but this is just saying, can we also get approval to get additional 10% in aid? The state requires us to have that additional approval. Ideally, if we get that 10% aid, that will help us not only save that $1 million in cost, but also it will help us sell energy back to the grid and be making money on potential solar energy project. In terms of the Board of Education elections, there's 4 seats that will be available, 3 3-year terms and 1 1-year term. There are 4 incumbents and 1 community member who has not been on the board yet. They are listed there, 4 incumbents and 1 who has not been on the board. Meet the Candidates Night is on this Thursday, May 9th at 6 p.m. here again at the GCPLC, and it will be live streamed. Next steps are that the board vote is on, the budget vote and board election is Tuesday, May 21st from 6:30 to 8:30 p.m. in the Spartan Field House at the Gates Chili High School. We do ask people to get out and vote. We do know that it's very important for the district that we get votes from our community. So if you want more information on the budget or board candidates, or to see this presentation, please go to gateschili.org/vote. In summary, we're going to try and maintain our current programming and staffing to continue with our district goals, use our state and federal funding to increase intervention and mental health supports, continue to provide multiple opportunities for student engagement. And we do acknowledge that it's a balanced budget. Our expenditures are balanced to our revenues in the proposal, but we are going to have to rely on our exhaustible reserve funds and fund balance. If you would like to learn more about the budget, please go to gatesjolly.org/bit-a-budget. There you will find a link to a bit of budget with Dr. Ball. It's the 4th year running. In the past, it's been 6 episodes. We've shortened it down to 3. The first one debuted yesterday, Monday, with the next 2 airing on Friday and Monday of next week. With that, thank you very much. Are there any questions? All right. This concludes our public hearing. Have a wonderful evening.